Hi, I'm Sean Gorman and welcome to another instalment of our What Is series. Today's topic is good and bad levers. So what is a good or a bad lever and where might we come across them? So in a recent instalment I talked about articles of association and I mentioned good and bad lever provisions, saying that was likely to be the topic of a future instalment. So the first thing to say, I think, is that good and bad lever provisions are something that you might find in a company's articles of association or in a shareholders agreement. And they usually arise where the employee of a company holds shares and has been given those shares, perhaps as an incentive to retain that employee and incentivise them to contribute to the growth of the value of a business. But why would you have good and bad lever provisions, and what do they do? So essentially they kick in if that person leaves employment, stops working for the company. If that happens, we need to understand what happens to the value of shares that they hold. And that's usually determined by whether they are a good or a bad lever. But what is a good lever and what is a bad lever? Well, it won't surprise you to know that that's subject to some considerable discussion and usually a bit of negotiation. But the typical approach taken is that essentially a good lever is someone who leaves the business through death or disability, and a bad lever is anybody else. However, those things are, as I say, usually subject to debate. But what does it mean if you're considered to be a good lever or if you're considered to be a bad lever? Well, if you're considered to be a good lever, then that would mean that when you leave, usually you have to sell your shares, and the value that you get for your shares is the market value. If you're a bad lever, again, it's very likely and almost certain that you would have to sell your shares, but the value that you would get for your shares would be very limited. It's more likely to be what we call the nominal value of shares, maybe something we'll cover in a later topic, or the price that was originally paid for those shares if they were paid for. So that's typically what a good and bad lever does. It essentially says if you leave on good terms, you'll get value. If you leave on bad terms, you won't get any value for your shares. Hope that helps. Thanks for listening.